Hello, everyone.
Yeah, there we go.
If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Wasn't that a fifth grade teacher thing to do? So thank you. My name is Kirsten Basler. I have the great honor of being the president of the Council of Chief State School Officers and the elected superintendent for the great state of North Dakota. Thank you very much. I'm going to apologize a little bit for my voice. Last Tuesday was an election day for me. I was just elected to my fourth term in office, and so thank you. And so my body said uncle a little bit on Thursday and said, you need to take a break. And I said, yes, but get me ready to come to ExcelinEd because that's where it's happening. So I appreciate you all choosing this session. You had lots of sessions to choose from. And today you are choosing this session. And I'm really excited about this session and what we're about to talk about, specifically because of the state that I come from. Today's strategy session is called Cutting Edge Strategies to Support Rural Education. That's a very, very important topic for all of us. Growing up in North Dakota, I describe North Dakota as one community with a really long main street. If I didn't date your brother in college, my sweet mate did. We all know each other. And that's kind of rural America. But now as I've moved into this role, I thought that North Dakota was rural, but I've realized that every state in the nation has some rural components to it. And we define it differently, and there's different levels and different degrees. But each one of us in this room, whether you're a policymaker, a funder, or a state legislator, or an implementer, as state chiefs are, you are impacted by the rural schools in your community, and it's a very, sometimes often forgot component of the leadership that we do, but it's too important to forget. And I think some elections, recently have really shown us that rural America are making their voice heard and cannot and should not be overlooked. So I really appreciate being on this panel today. We have some great panelists. We have Brett Alessi from Empower Schools. We have Janet Ayers from the Ayers Foundation Trust, and we have the Honorable Senator Adam Pugh from the great state of Oklahoma. Thanks for hosting us, Adam. Thank you. Let's give our panelists a big round of applause. So before we jump into specific questions, I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to share just a little bit about yourself and why you're so passionate about rural education. As there's the saying in education that they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So this is your opportunity to kind of tell your why story or your origin story. Brett, if we can start with you.
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. Wasn't sure. Thank you. So my name is Brett Alessi. I'm a partner and co-founder with Empower Schools. You'd be forgiven if you thought Empower Schools is actually running schools. We're not running schools. We're trying to empower other people to design schools that work for their community. And we have been now working pretty deeply in 5 states with communities to develop what we call proof points and be able to scale some of that success through policy, which I'm excited to talk with you more about today. In terms of our rural work, it really started in South Texas, where we had a chance to bring together work with the community to bring together higher ed, industry, as well as K-12 to think about new and different ways to expand opportunities for young people to access college and career opportunities. In terms of the why question, why I love rural, there's lots of reasons I love working in rural, but a couple have already been hit on. The fact that everyone knows everybody else makes it a little bit easier to work in rural in a lot of ways. So in the example I just gave in South Texas, the fact that the superintendent knew the superintendent next door, knows the folks who run the businesses in town, knows who runs higher ed, knows everybody. There's already this base level of trust and an ability to create partnerships that is much easier in a rural community. The second thing I love about rural is, or another thing I love about rural, lots more than 2 things I love about rural. Another thing I love about rural is, of course, that innovation, I think, oftentimes starts in rural places, and I think more than other places. And sometimes that's because they've had to innovate to survive. Sometimes state education agencies or philanthropy. I read a stat recently that 7% of philanthropy is invested in rural areas, while 20% of our students in America attend rural schools. So there's a lot of scarcity in rural America, so they've kind of had to innovate to survive. And the fact that there's very little red tape in rural communities, the superintendent's often the bus driver, also the football coach. It's pretty easy for that person to kind of take risks as well. So it's been really exciting for us to work in some of these rural areas, and a privilege for us. And not easy to find, kind of grim headlines out there about rural education, but we've been able to work in amazing communities where you have rural students who are accessing opportunities that their urban and suburban peers wish they had, that they're just working with NASA to design and launch and retrieve rockets. They are working with my colleague in Indiana around youth entrepreneurship and starting businesses and staying in their communities. They're addressing shortages related to healthcare and teacher and stepping into those roles in their community and helping these communities thrive. So for us, it's been a real privilege and honor to work in these rural areas, and we're really excited about it.
Thank you, Brett. Janet.
Thanks, Kirsten. I'm the 7% of the philanthropy in rural Tennessee. So I will start there. I'm the president of the Heirs Foundation Trust, and we've been in existence for 25 years. I've been the president since 2007, and it's a foundation my husband started and I leaned into when we were married. And I'm just happy to be here and talk about what our foundation does and just really learn from the panelists in this group. But the reason I have such a passion for this is I am a rural girl. I'm from rural East Tennessee. My husband is from rural West Tennessee. I think it is the heartbeat of what this country is, and it is a forgotten space. And so our work is very focused in removing barriers in these rural communities. We focus on education, social welfare, and conservation, but our real emphasis is education in our Air Scholars program. And I know we'll get into the depth and breadth of what we do, but we are barrier removers in the communities where we are. All means all to us. If you're going to cherry pick, you better have 100%. We don't cherry pick because of the very thing that is the fabric of a rural community. You work there, you live there, you play there, you go to church there, you see everybody at the grocery store. It matters how you treat each other, especially in these rural communities. And so we lean in, and we're significant community partners wherever we are.
Thank you, Janet. Senator Pugh.
Thanks, Madam Superintendent. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. I am not a rural legislator. I do own jeans and cowboy boots, and if I run for statewide, I'll probably start wearing them. However, I actually grew up in a small rural community in Pennsylvania. And George McGovern once said, Pennsylvania is really just Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Alabama in between. And so, as has been mentioned, I know what it's like to see your teachers in church or bump into somebody at the grocery store that used to be your high school baseball coach. I know what it's like when you mess up in 8th grade and your teacher calls your mom and says, I know you're raising your son better than that. And so Oklahoma is predominantly rural school districts. And so even though I represent a suburban community now, we will never elevate education in the state of Oklahoma if we don't elevate all 520 school districts. So what are the advantages that rural Oklahoma has? Well, first off, in the state of Oklahoma, rural school districts have twice as many two-parent homes as our urban suburban school districts. Rural Oklahoma has hundreds of years of history and traditions and value sets that are so ingrained in that community that they have the power to be unlocked through what is most often than not the largest employer in that district, which is the public school system. And if we can't figure out how to provide exactly the same opportunities, maybe in a more unique way than my school district provides for my kids currently, if we can't figure out how no matter where you live in the state of Oklahoma, whether you graduate with 7 kids or 700, that you should have a great calculus teacher available to you. Now, that doesn't mean they'll be in front of your class. That might mean a virtual opportunity. Or that you may not have to work the same land that your grandparents worked. If you are good work fixing a John Deere, you can fix an airplane. You just maybe have never seen one. But we've got the largest engineering facility in the Department of Defense, just a few miles down I-40 in Tinker Air Force Base. And there are kids in rural Oklahoma that have insane potential to solve a national security issue for the Department of Defense. and be engineers and jet mechanics and logisticians. They just need to be exposed to those opportunities. And we need to connect those opportunities directly into the classroom as much as possible. And it may look different by leveraging technology or having innovative charter schools or more parental choice options or not doing seat time and blending the way kids learn and giving them externships and internships and apprenticeships. But those kids are not limited, and we need to start thinking about it in a much different way. And so I am passionate about this issue because I wouldn't be before you if it wasn't for education. That is absolutely a fact. And I want every kid to have the same opportunity I had.
Thank you, Senator Pugh, Janet, and Brett. As you can see, these individuals are leading this work on the ground. They're into this, and I'm really excited to be able to have a conversation with them today. So, Janet, if we can start with you. One of the challenges that are facing rural schools is the low high school graduation rate and college enrollment rates. How have you and your foundation thought about this problem and how you are addressing the challenge, or at least trying to help address the challenge?
We started out in rural Parsons, Tennessee, with the realization that there were a lot of scholarships and things happening on the ground that our students who could benefit from weren't benefiting from them. So 25 years ago, less than 30% of our students even knew that there was post-secondary opportunities to continue their education past high school. You fast forward to today, we're in 33 different high schools in 21 counties, at-risk and distressed counties. And what we're doing is leaning in there. We provide counselors, master's degree counselors that are on our payroll through the foundation. They're embedded in the schools. We have a partnership with the school system. We do an MOU with the school systems where we are. And we embed those counselors into school to lean in and start working with those students in the 8th grade. And we follow those students, one student at a time, one need at a time. And it's not just FAFSA completion and college visits and all the things that you hear when you think about, when you say college access programs. But ours is much, much deeper than that. We become a fabric of that community, a fabric of that school, because we're embedded in the school, but not of the school. We have flexibility and an understanding that we can work with those students. And when I did my introduction and I said all means all, that we don't cherry pick, one of the things that we find when we go into a school, well, you don't serve the students with special diplomas. Yes, we do. So if I tell you that in a school that we go into and we move the percentage point up 20 points in 1 year, which is a statistic that's validated externally, that in our first year of our school, our numbers go up to about 20% continuing their college increase. Our legacy schools, we're anywhere from the floor of 75% and above. We persist at 82% of our students in college or post-secondary going and completing that work. It's because we work individually with those students since the 8th grade through high school, through whatever they complete post-secondary, whether it's a technical school, community college, 4-year, or military. We are with them the whole entire way with that counselor arm in arm. I don't know who said it, they don't care what you know until they know that you care. They know that we care, and we are there and not cherry picking. And that's why we have these great results. You can't shortcut relationships. We use a lot of different techniques, but you can't shortcut it. But if you were to have any of our 105 counselors sitting here right now, you know what they tell you their job description was? Barrier removers. Whatever it takes, a student at a time to get them to and through.
Thank you, Janet, for that. You have just exemplified that they don't know how much you care. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Wow, one student at a time through the entire journey. That's a relationship. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Brett, I'm going to pivot to you a bit. The Rural School Innovation Zones, RSIZ, have created new opportunities for high school students in rural communities. So I'm going to full disclosure here. So the Innovation Zone, so happening in Texas, I'm going to fangirl a little bit because I was watching your work and I thought, well, if it can happen in rural Texas, and people have said if you take North Dakota and you flip it 90 degrees, it fits right into West Texas, the entire thing. So I thought, well, if it's working there. So I did a lot of 4 years ago, I did a lot of investigation, a lot of research about what you were doing because I thought it's working there. So I'm so thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to sit on this panel with you today and learn more about it from the person. You can get a lot from the reports and the results, but we've done a lot of work in North Dakota that has been modeled after the work that you did. Of course, North Dakota-ized it, as you will, because we can't just copy Texas, because that wouldn't be right. But tell us about how your state and districts came together to form this partnership and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's been really exciting, and first of all, it is definitely it's an army, as you know. It's not me. It's all the people in the community doing the actual work on the ground who are making this happen. But it really started when the state of Texas, honestly, like they identified a rural school district about an hour and a half from Corpus Christi that was really struggling, and it was on the verge of closure. And the community was struggling. The students had limited opportunities. That if they did have some success there, they were leaving those communities. And they asked us, hey, would you guys go down and take a look at this and see if you can help them develop some kind of a solution? Had a chance to go down there, and first thing I saw was just so much pride in this community. So I knew right away consolidation was not going to be an option for this community. And then we started talking to districts next door and learning from superintendents there that they also were struggling with some of the same issues. Like, they also wish they had more opportunities for their students to expand college and career pathways. Some of them had really strong pathways, but some of them actually offered pathways because they happen to have a person in the community who knew something about that pathway, so they happened to offer that. But it wasn't really aligned to where jobs are going to be in the future. So we had a chance to kind of take a step back and just say, wait a second, everybody's collectively as a region, we have real assets where we can offer a lot of opportunities for these students, potentially even as many as their urban and suburban peers have. So what if we took a step back and created a different dynamic and took a more regional approach? So you could still take your core classes at your high school, but at each individual high school could specialize in at least one high-quality pathway aligned to regional labor market needs. And if you're at any one of the high schools, you could actually figure out a way to get to that high school. We'll bring in the colleges to offer support for classes they can't get in high school. We'll bring in industry to offer jobs and support in terms of the skills they're going to need to be successful in the field. And that could be pretty exciting. So I had a chance to do that. It turns out in Texas, like other places, families and schools are okay when their kids take classes with kids from different districts, but they want to make sure they play football for their home team on Friday nights, right? That's really important for these folks. So we're able to do that, and it took a lot of work. I'm not going to be honest. I'll be honest. I mean, it took a lot of aligning schedules and making sure people could access these different opportunities. Had to do a big labor market analysis to make sure that the pathways that we're going to offer are going to be aligned to where the jobs are going to be not just today, but in the future, and get the 2-year and 4-year colleges on board. So it took a ton of coordination. Again, thank God everyone in these communities know each other. It was really helpful to be able to make that work. And then we really wanted to formalize it through the agreements. So Janet mentioned the MOUs. We also think a ton about that. So if we're going to spend all the work setting this up, this can't just be a handshake agreement that's going to exist between a superintendent and his neighboring superintendent next door. This has to be formalized through an actual performance agreement, which helps to break down some of the silos. So now the higher ed's at the table, K-12's at the table, industry's at the table, all sign in this agreement, and they're all now sharing the accountability too. So it's not that superintendents don't care what happens when their kids graduate, but it's not their problem anymore. So now it's more of a continuum where they're all invested in what's happening with these kids. And it's been super exciting to see the results here. So this happened right before COVID. Even during COVID and in the past couple of years, the results have been pretty incredible. We're still waiting. Obviously, it takes a little while to kind of see what happens over time. But early on, we've quadrupled the number of students completing dual credit courses. We've been able to, move from 7% of students getting certifications to 54%, which is 2.5 times the state average. And again, this is a region that was about to foreclose. The state was going to take it over. So it's pretty impressive they've been able to get this done. And one thing that I think is obviously relevant to this conversation is just that as this work happened, you mentioned you were able to go down and visit and share some of the work. Other folks were excited about that too, and we had a chance to work with some policymakers in Texas to really potentially scale this work through legislation. So in the last legislative session, able to work with some folks in this room, even some folks from TEA, some folks from the governor's office, lieutenant governor's office, to really pass some new legislation to be able to really do 3 things. One, codifying the model. So to your point, you can't just take something that works in South Texas, think it's going to work in North Dakota or anywhere else in Texas for that matter. But there are some important features that you want to try to make sure are in place to be able to ensure that's going to be set up for success over time. So some core features like all means all. So making sure you're not designing these programs, just for a tracking mechanism for low-performing kids or just for high-performing kids, and making sure it's accessible for everybody. Making sure that that there's formalized agreements in place, making sure there's multiple districts involved, making sure higher ed and industry at the table. Those are all core features of this model that can be applied anywhere. The second thing the policy does is it is incentivizing this work for new regions. So there's a small grants planning program. So now there are 2 other regions in Texas that are approved to be able to plan this and form more in kind of the planning stages. So over time, we're going to have 30 districts in Texas sort of in a planning phase and working on this, which is pretty exciting. And the last piece, which I'm potentially most excited about, is guarantees funding based on success. So Texas already leads the way, I think, in a lot of ways in our country around paying for performance, and they've been paying for readiness. But the cool thing about this new function is that actually now when a student from this program receives a credential of value within 5 years, that'll trigger a payment back to the district and to this region, which is really exciting. So in that way, it's sustainable over time as well. So something that we're super excited about. Some folks in Colorado have a chance to visit, some folks from Indiana visited, and now we have a number of these happening in other states as well, and we're hopeful that it might work in other places, maybe even one day North Dakota.
My fingers are crossed. That's why I ran again. So I'm going to pull on that string a little bit if I can, Brett. So you mentioned something that was interesting that said they all want them to play for their own football team, have their own football team. So in North Dakota, our student population for K through 12 has grown nearly 20% in the last 12 years. But our smaller towns are actually shrinking. Most of our student growth is in the 5 or 6 main metropolitan areas, what we call metropolitan in North Dakota. But it was interesting, during that transition of the 90s, as we were starting to see the shrinkage, we saw our school districts consolidate and form cooperatives for our athletic teams, for our football teams and for our basketball teams. And really don't seem to have any resistance to loading the kids on a bus and traveling 15, 20 miles down a state highway for football practice. And one of the things that our legislators in our state said they wish that they had done is if they were going to consolidate for an athletic team, that they would have required them to consolidate for some administrative purposes, for some course offerings, and they didn't do that. The biggest challenge in North Dakota that we see is actually what our communities don't want is to lose their superintendent, to lose their own school board, their own superintendent. So talk to me about the governance of this. Did you have that challenge in Texas where every school district, whether they had 50 kids or 500 kids, wanted to have their own dedicated full-time superintendent making these decisions and controlling, if you will, the master schedule? So
yeah, no, it's such an important point. And again, it's going to look different everywhere. I think what happened there may or may not be what happens everywhere else, but I think it should be. There should be some core elements that are in place, but I think in terms of your question specifically, in this case, what we did, we ended up, we talked earlier about this capacity issue. So there's also a huge capacity issue in these smaller communities. So we ended up starting a new nonprofit called the Rural Schools Innovation Zone that's based in South Texas, that is run locally. And on the board of that nonprofit is a superintendent from each one of the participating school districts, as well as higher ed and industry. So in that way, they feel like they all have a voice at the table. They've talked a little bit about, like, should we consolidate some of the services more? But I think for now, they felt like that was a good solution, where they felt like there was, this joint governance around from the different sectors, breaking down some of the silos, again, like I mentioned earlier, but they haven't moved towards sort of having, one single superintendent. There's definitely some rivalry, and even actually the executive director who runs the nonprofit comes from one of those districts, and even then there was some suspicion around, is he favoring that district versus that district? So that tension's real.
It's real.
It is real, and I don't want to downplay that, but I do think in this situation they decided that as long as there's a voice kind of on this nonprofit, that was a good way to resolve that.
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brett. Senator Pugh, I'm going to turn to you. I was joking with Senator earlier that I feel privileged to be on this side of the microphone from a legislator, because generally I'm on the other side asking and being asked all the questions. So I'm going to take advantage of this. And I'm excited to talk to you because policy is the love of this job that I have. So I want to talk to you a bit about policy. As you mentioned, over half of Oklahoma schools are in rural communities. And as chair of the Education Committee, what are the policy challenges that you see that rural schools in Oklahoma face when it comes to specifically recruiting and retaining its educators? And then a follow-up to that is, how have you and your colleagues addressed those challenges?
Sure. One thing you'll never hear a good Okie say is we're going to copy Texas. So I certainly won't go there, just in case there's a camera or something. I think if I asked all legislators in this room, are you struggling with the teacher pipeline? The answer would be yes, right? It is, and I tell my colleagues this all the time, it is a 50-state competition for quality, effective teachers. It just is. And every state is trying to uniquely solve a very serious workforce problem. And it doesn't matter what your pay scale is. It doesn't matter, what your academic outcomes are in every state. We know that we have a teacher shortage. I think we in Oklahoma have to figure out, because we are having the same problem as North Dakota and probably other states, is in 2020, when we did our census, what we saw is our 2 metro areas grew significantly, and 75 of our 77 counties lost population. And that's a challenge for us. Now, we have a great program in the medical field in Oklahoma called Green Coats to White Coats. And it is FFA students who get put on a track to go to medical school. And so I asked a question a few years ago, well, why aren't we doing that for teachers? We know that if you look at the teaching workforce in Oklahoma, the data is overwhelming that the majority of teachers in those school districts grew up in those communities. So why aren't we putting those students on a pathway to come right back into those classrooms and serve their communities? And that's some of the policy aims that we've kind of started walking towards. The Grow Your Own, the training paraprofessionals, maybe at night or part-time, or giving them time off, or bringing an adjunct professor into your school district to train your paras for an hour or 2 over lunchtime. And school districts using foundation dollars, maybe using some of their formula dollars to be able to pay higher ed for some of that training. And then those paras or support staff or some of those students will turn around and come right back into those classrooms. So we are really working on this. And if I could tell one other story, Madam Super, when I got out of the Air Force, I had the honor of being on the United States Olympic team for skeleton. And so I was traveling from Oklahoma City to Lake Placid to train, and I needed a job. So I was a long-term substitute in a small rural school here in Oklahoma. And what I noticed when I walked into my school every single morning was there were no other men working in the building. I was literally in this one particular district, and I think it's the same for most. I was the only male teacher in that school building. And kids would just latch onto me. They just needed a male figure in their life. And so I filed a bill last year for military veterans, because if you look at the demographics of military members, it's still predominantly male from small rural communities. And so I filed a bill called the VETS Act, the Veterans Entering Teaching Service. And the goal was to take veterans, and it's not like a troops to teachers, it's to take veterans and recruit them back to the state of Oklahoma. Because the one thing that veterans don't ever get to do is choose where they live. So when you get out of the military, for the first time in your life, Uncle Sam doesn't tell you where to go. And a lot of those men and women just want to go home. And so we tried to recruit veterans to come home or come to Oklahoma and make it home, like I did. And we will pay for you to go to a state university. We will pay for all the credentialing necessary if you promise us to go work in a Title I school. And those Title I schools were predominantly in small rural communities. Now, my House members aren't nearly as forward-thinking as the Senate, obviously. Right, Ronnie? Is that fair? I'm just kidding. I know. Justin, I see you over there. I'm just kidding. It didn't make it over the finish line because sometimes we're not ready for things, or it's not a perfect idea, and I failed, just to be frank. But I'm not going to stop because I'm passionate about fixing this issue. I want great teachers in our classrooms. I will do everything short of sin to make that happen, because I know that outside of the mom and the dad, it is the most influential thing in a kid's educational experience is having a great teacher in front of them, just like I did. And so I'm here to steal some of your ideas, not you, Texas, but everybody else. I am here to steal your ideas. That's why I come to this conference, because I love learning about this, and we've got to fix this. Our teacher shortage is only growing, and I don't think we've come up with the perfect solution yet.
Thank you for that, Senator. So I really appreciate your emphasis on the Grow Your Own. Many of you probably have your own Grow Your Own programs. Some of you may have taken the next step to make it official and become part of the Department of Labor apprenticeship programs. And I think it's a really important component that we don't talk about often enough. Those paraprofessionals, to recognize the value that those paraprofessionals play not only in supporting the teachers, but the relationships that Janet talks about with those students. Sometimes your students will spend more time with their paraprofessional in the school day than they will anyone else. And it was interesting, I have a family cabinet and a family engagement cabinet. A colleague of mine jokes that I have more kitchen cabinets than the average kitchen does. But I meet with the family cabinet every quarter for a full day to talk about what is important and on their minds and their hearts. And it was them that brought the idea to me. They said, why aren't we? Why is the state or our school districts not investing in those paraprofessionals? And so we started a program. It's not that expensive, but these paraprofessionals are hungry to be better at their jobs. They live in the communities that they're working in. They have roots in those communities. They either have a spouse or their children are enrolled in that school. But they are sometimes landlocked for that professional development that makes them better educators. And when we use the term education in North Dakota, it's from the crossing guard, the crosswalk guard, all the way up to the school board president. We have a responsibility to invest in all of those. So interestingly enough, a little story of origin for me, I was on my way to law school and began working as a paraprofessional in a school, and that's when I switched and pivoted. And so I've done everything that I could possibly do. And as a paraprofessional, as all my teachers, we were teachers' aides at that point, we were all collectively hungry to get better. That is something that never goes away. So then you become a teacher, a building leader, a district leader, school board president in my son's home community where they were going to school, and now the state superintendent. So all of that, we deserve to provide professional development to all of them. So one thing that I would like to share as well about investing in those paraprofessionals, whether it's a state-run Grow Your Own, or if you choose to engage in the official apprenticeship program through the Department of Labor, both are valuable. As education funding continues to get cut, workforce funding in this nation is not. And so there has to be a way for us to partner more completely and more fully with those other sources of revenue. But one thing that I would ask not to forget to all of you on this panel and those of you in this room is you mentioned the families is the most influential. Second most influential, right after that is the teachers. Right behind teachers are those building principals. And again, the teacher shortage, in my opinion, is impacted by the leaders that they work for. And too often, we take a great teacher, they go to a night school or a summer program, they do maybe 2 or 3 weeks of an internship, and then we throw them into a building. They do not know how to be the instructional coach and the supporter that they need. So last January of 2023, North Dakota requested from the Department of Labor that the principal be added to the apprenticeable occupation list. And so we began a principal apprenticeship program last fall. We're in our second cohort. There is a principal apprenticeship playbook. I will tell you, we will have a forever churn with our teacher shortage and our retention issue if we don't begin to invest in our principals the way that we do in every other occupation. So that's my little soapbox for that. I'm going to pivot back to you, Senator, and ask you some follow-up questions about your open enrollment policies. You guys have done some significant work in supporting rural students in open enrollment, but and it's shown some promise, but when you're rural, it's like, well, what about transportation? How have you overcome those challenges?
Great question, and I'm going to take it a little broader. Since you're in my state, Madam Superintendent, I'll take some personal privilege. No, I'm just kidding. So we did, open transfer in the state of Oklahoma. That was a bloody battle. Oh, my goodness. That was my first bill I ran when I became chair of education. And by the way, when I got elected in 2016, you know what I told the pro tem? I'll do anything but education, Mr. Pro Tem. Joke's on me. And here I am. But when I became chair of education, open transfer was the first piece of legislation we worked on. And I still don't think it's a perfect policy solution. But I know that one of the discussions was transportation. And so the first thing we did is we in statute, for whatever reason, we had in statute that the public school transportation system couldn't cross district lines. That seemed quite stupid, frankly. Why would we? We can literally measure helium at the edges of the universe, and we can't figure out how to take a kid on a school bus from one district to the next. I just don't believe it's that hard if we put smart people to figure out the logistics. Now, that may mean District A, you start at 9, District B, you start at 9:15. We can solve this problem. So we removed all the barriers and allowed superintendents and school leaders to say, you all figure this out. And it doesn't have to be for the whole day, by the way. If the school district 2 miles away has the best ag program in the state, why can't your kids go access it? Now, they said, well, we'd love to, but we don't have a code share, the way we can share kids and seat time and the way that works. And how do you share finances? And we said, we'll figure this out for you, or I would say that's not fair, with you. We need to do this. So we really have tried to peel back all the regs on transportation, and we ask superintendents, you bring the solutions. You know what your kids need. I don't know what all 520 school districts need. 2 other things, if I may, on the innovative front. I've heard time and again about resources. And I met with a school district a few months ago, and I'm an aerospace guy. I have an aerospace company. It's my passion. I think that Oklahoma is the best state in the country for aerospace. And so we have the ability right here to solve Tinker and Altus Air Force Base and Vance Air Force Base if we can produce the workforce. So I had a school district come to me and say, I want to start a drone program, but I don't have anybody in my STEM department that is FAA certified to actually run the drone program. So I said, well, we can fix that. How about we have an innovation fund where you apply? I need $50,000 to go get my FAA Part 141 certification. And you apply to this innovation fund. I think it was Milton Friedman who said, you tax things you want less of, and you incentivize things you want more of. So why aren't we incentivizing the things we want to see happen inside school districts? You want to innovate? Here's some resources and incentives to do so. You want to start a drone program? I know you may not have, as a small district, $50,000 to buy some drones and get a STEM teacher certified, but here's $50,000 from this innovation fund, and you're going to go launch this program and change kids' lives potentially. The other thing that I worry that we do is, we don't incentivize risk-taking in government. Risk-taking is incentivized in the private sector. You're an entrepreneur, you take all the risk, you make a lot of money if you're successful. But in school districts, if you fail, what do policymakers do? They bang you over the head. You wasted taxpayer dollars. Well, how is a district going to innovate and be creative if they're always fearful that people like me are going to go hammer them over the head? Now, I don't want to waste taxpayer money, but I want to incentivize risk. With risk comes the opportunity to fail. But it comes great opportunity to be successful. And so we're working in the state of Oklahoma on a regulatory sandbox for school districts to say, hey, if you want to trade out some mandate or requirement, we'll relinquish that requirement on your district, but what do we get for it? Oh, well, you get a 5% raise in NAEP scores over the next 5 years. I'm in. I'll buy it from you. No problem. We'll relinquish this requirement as a state because we're going to get something. And if you mess up, that's okay. I'm going to be here to help your kids and give you all the resources you need. And we'll come back and learn lessons from this. We don't want you to stop risk-taking. If we are serious about, in Oklahoma, 520 different ways to solve community problems through their school districts, then we have to be serious about giving our districts all the opportunities to be successful. And so we're going to continue to push the envelope in the state of Oklahoma. We have to. We know where we rank nationally. We have to give school districts all the autonomy and authority to go solve their problems locally. And they don't need people like me telling them what to do. They need people like me asking questions how I can help them be successful. And that's what we're going to focus on.
Thank you, Senator Pugh. And there's a lot of technology out there. I'm going to foray into another passion of mine, which is I was a school librarian for a number of years, which meant I taught technology. So AI is fascinating to me. And I just saw a demonstration. You talked about the transportation problems, the scheduling problems. That's the age old, especially for high school principals, right? Like, how are you going to fit all? I just saw a demonstration of one of our high schools in our largest school district in the state of North Dakota, 4,500 kids, 9 through 12. What used to take the counselors and the school administration team the entire month of July, when the students would enroll for their first choice, second choice, third choice, and then trying to figure out, match up all the teachers. And in North Dakota, we approach AI as human problem, human question, use the tool of technology of the day, which happens to be AI right now, and then always review and make the decision with a human eye. So they use the most recent tool of AI. They inputted all of those things, and within 20 minutes, they had master schedule for their 4,500 students with the teachers all allocated. So the tool to be able to put humans for the relationship that Janet talks about is there. These schedule problems, these transportation problems, they can be solved. And as you said again, Janet, removing barriers, that's what they call their job. We have to leverage that. So thank you for your work in Oklahoma to continue pushing on that. Janet and Brett, I'm going to pivot back to you all. So you both identified and are working to improve college and career pathways, which is truly important. I so appreciate the evolution that we have gone from 12 years ago when I took office. It was college readiness, college readiness, college readiness. And now I've heard both of you say college, work, or military, so many just honorable pathways, and specific, especially for rural students. So Janet, in addition to your work with graduation and college enrollment, Tennessee has also implemented broader policy levers like the Tennessee Promise. How has this initiative influenced outcomes in rural communities? And could you share some of the outcome data that highlights the impact of those policies?
I think Tennessee was one of the first to do. For those of y'all who don't know what Tennessee Promise is, in Tennessee, all eligible high school students receive tuition-paid community college or technical school, which is fantastic. And we've been that Tennessee Promise partner with the state since inception, since 2015. And so I want to pull it back a little bit about what that did and why these policies are so important. And then it always takes you back to that one-on-one relationship. It changed the culture and the conversation around the dinner table when Tennessee Promise came, because so many times, especially in rural communities, you don't even have that college conversation or post-secondary because cost becomes your automatic barrier. I can't afford to go, so therefore you don't talk about it. So probably the thing that Tennessee Promise did more than anything was a culture change and a conversation change at the dinner table. Once you get there, then you start getting into the accountability piece. And we at the foundation in the state of Tennessee, data matters, accountability matters. So you can have anecdotally things that sound like great programs, but if you're not measuring it along the way, there are different metrics along the way. The first one that anybody in here that has a student of their own going to college or working with anyone is the completion of that FAFSA that is terribly hard to do, and it was supposed to get easier this year, and it was even worse this year. So I want to give some metrics that we've experienced with the foundation, but it talks about how our work, how we've levered what we do philanthropically and how we partner with the state of Tennessee. And sometimes as the philanthropist in the room, we are the venture capitalists that then we can inform the legislature so that you can scale it, but you're not taking the hard knocks because we're the ones that are helping partner with you to help scale. Tennessee Promise was one of those initiatives. So in the state of Tennessee, your first track or anybody going to college, think of it as your runway, to use the aviation term. Your FAFSA is your runway. If you don't complete that FAFSA, you're probably not going to continue your education, because that's the first barrier you have to remove, because that opens all the doors to being able to access those funds, including the Tennessee Promise. One of the things that Tennessee Promise does is they had volunteer mentors because you have to have that FAFSA. State of Tennessee was the leader in the country this year in FAFSA completion. To give you a metric of the Ayers Foundation, we were 19 percentage points higher than the higher percentage in the nation if you pull out a subsegment of the community. So while the policy drove and you have this blanket policy, you will never be able to remove that opportunity to be a one-on-one with those students. Another example is we were looking at the Tennessee Higher Education Commission's data for 2022 because, like a lot of state measures, you're always operating in arrears, and it's hard to operate futuristically when you're doing numbers based on in arrears. And our numbers internally for the college-going students was 5 times higher than the state of Tennessee, with 82% of that class continuing. It is a perfect marriage of public-private. Tennessee Promise changed the conversation. But without that personal relationship, it doesn't move the numbers unless you have that one-on-one. So my cautionary tale there is you can't do either or. You have to do both. You have to have the big, broad policies, but then you have to have on-the-ground work to make that real impact happen. Because the state of Tennessee was the highest in the country with almost 70%. That meant the state of Tennessee was leaving 30% of their students not continuing their education past high school. I left 7% on the table, and that bothers me. 93% of all of our schools completed their FAFSA. So I at least know my runway's 93%. But 7% of my students got left behind, and that's not okay. But I think we need to start talking about it in terms like that.
All means all to you.
It does.
Thank you, Janet. Brett, you've been doing this work across multiple different states. What have you learned from this experience, and what are the challenges that states need to be aware of as they try to advance this work?
Yeah, we have. I've been lucky enough to work on this in multiple places. Actually, I mentioned earlier my colleague from Indiana is here, and working with the Chamber there now, Chamber of Commerce in Indiana right now to think about a policy solution in Indiana, which is exciting. I think a few things I talked about already. This codifying what works is a really important piece. So not that, again, it's going to look different everywhere, but I do feel like if you're going to go through the trouble of trying to create a partnership like they've been able to do in Texas, to ensure that we have some of the right pieces there so that if it's going to be done somewhere else, it has the best chance of success. So that's an important piece. I certainly think, the fact that, and that some of that comes into that is that it's available for all students. Like Janet mentioned, all means all. The pathways are aligned to labor market needs. These formal agreements I mentioned earlier, they're so important. I'm glad we had that in place in Colorado. We had a collaborative working there, and we started working with 6 districts. 2 years later, 4 of the 6 superintendents left, and the president of the 4-year university left, but the work continued seamlessly because everyone was really invested. They were bought in through these formal agreements, so I think those are really important to have in place. And then these capacity constraints are real. Like you asked about the governance piece earlier, and I think having a dedicated capacity of, again, in Texas, it was a new nonprofit we set up, but it could be an existing nonprofit. But I just think having an ability for them to be able to really play a role in coordinating this across the region, I think is really important, and so it shouldn't be underestimated. And then the one last quick thing I'll just say is I think just being able to invest in rural, and the senator hit on this, but I think it doesn't necessarily require a huge amount of money, but I think the returns on rural, there's so much innovation happening there. I said earlier that we're seeing it come to urban places now. We're getting calls now from Colorado Springs, for example, which is an urban area, saying, hey, what's happening in rural Colorado is super interesting. Like, I'm really interested in learning more about that. Can we think about ways to collaborate and share resources in different ways? So I just think what happens in these rural areas is applicable in some of these urban areas too, and it's worth investing in them to figure out some of these things related to teacher shortages or whatever they might be. So just wanted to hit on that too. I think it's a really important point.
Those are important points. Thank you so much. Before I turn it over to the audience for questions, each of you has shared with us a different challenge that you have helped rural communities face, and you've developed unique solutions. So different perspectives, different approaches, but I want to step back for a moment and focus on the commonality that all 3 of you have and what brings you together. They have all targeted rural communities. So as you think about the audience here, 1,200 people in attendance at this conference, policymakers, funders, implementers, and they're addressing the challenges of rural education. What advice would you give to them as they seek to go into their communities and their states and conduct this type of work? Senator, we'll start with you.
Geez. Brett, do you want to go? You know what? I think what I had to learn, honestly, as a suburban legislator, was I don't think any rural community in my state would take kindly to a guy in a suit showing up and saying, this is what you're going to do. So when I became chair, every summer I started inviting every superintendent. I think we have the most school districts per capita in the country, 520. But I started inviting every superintendent to the Capitol and said, what do you all need? Everything's on the table, by the way. Everything is on the table. There is no idea that's a bad idea. We may be hard to implement. It may not work. But no idea is a bad idea. So everything's on the table. Why aren't you partnering with charter schools in communities? You don't have to go find a calculus teacher. They're hard to find in my school district. So virtualize it. Partner with a charter school. Partner with a private entity. Bring in someone from Boeing that will teach structural engineering. They're right here. Make them adjunct. So everything is available to you. There's no ask that I won't consider. But I need to hear what you all need rather than tell you what you need. And that's been a lesson I'm still learning. I have had to learn that lesson. Rural communities in Oklahoma are conservative. They're traditional. They don't want someone from the government telling them how to run their districts and what to do. And I've had to learn that. And that's hard as a policymaker that wants to just go solve a problem. But I've had to learn how to listen to what they need first and then put it in a statutory framework that'll help them meet a need. And so that would be my recommendation to any policymaker is sit down and ask them what they need and then listen.
Thank you. Janet?
I think if I'm going to just put on purely my rural hat, the advice I would say, and I will give a story behind that too, but so many times in rural communities, and quite candidly, any underserved community at all, which is very common with urban, suburban, and rural, is so many times a couple of things happens. You say it's good enough. Stop saying it's good enough. Fight for what is best. And so many times there are programs that come in, and they're in and they're out, and you're still standing. And you get all these promises, so no wonder we're a little leery. Everybody's been there to come to save you, and then they leave. That whatever you do, it takes a minute to change. That the programs that you're looking at, that while there are immediate wins, any change, you look for those immediate wins, but you're really looking for long-term solutions. And I want to tell you the Perry County story that really drilled that home for us, that kind of wraps up a lot of this conversation about rural teacher pipeline and about pathways and all those things. Our new frontier is Come Home Tennessee. Because what we discovered with our foundation, when you're wildly successful, as this foundation has been that if we're doing our job well, a lot of our students are going to and through and completing post-secondary education, but they're not coming back. So we really have drained the best and brightest from our community, which is also the biggest fear of that rural community of why they don't want to go in the first place. So how do you get them to come home Tennessee? Perry County is a rural county that we serve in Tennessee that has one of the highest unemployment rates, but has always been in the top 5 college-going counties in the state of Tennessee. Lots of years, the highest-going college-going county in the state of Tennessee. But when you look at the census, we're in the lower percentile of the college-educated workforce and citizenry. So when you were to ask the Economic Development Group in Perry County, Tennessee, what's your biggest problem? Well, it would be the infrastructure, or, they would name a lot of things. Or we just don't have an educated workforce. Well, yes, you do. We're just exporting them out. So we have to start bringing them home. So Come Home Tennessee also encapsulates the fact that I have counselors in front of these students who are continuing their education. They're getting counseled and coached and right fits to where they're going to go to college or military or technical school or whatever. But to your point, a lot of them want to come back and teach. So we can be able to help influence some to come back and to be teachers and doctors and architects and whatever those communities need, because we're right in front of them. So we use all the tools that are available to us, but we bring it right back to that home. So I think that the best message to always keep in mind when you're representing that rural, whether you're a legislator or you're pulling a package together, is don't settle for less than anyone else expects anywhere else. Because I'm going to tell you the best I have a house in Nashville. I also have houses in East and West rural Tennessee. I love my rural homes. That is where there's some quality of life. I like being able to know my neighbor. So just remember that it's a disenfranchised group at the start. So don't come in thinking you have all the solutions, and listen to them. But we need to stop selling ourselves short, and we do that.
Thank you, Janet.
Sorry, that was my soapbox.
That was great.
I finally got a chance to do my soapbox.
And it was
That was a great
worthwhile.
soapbox. And I love both of you hit on this, visiting these rural areas and listening. I think that's so important. So I definitely want to echo that, what both of my colleagues here said. I did mention before about investing in rural and how important that is, and I think that is really important. But I also want to say it's not just about the money. So I also think, the Senator alluded to this earlier, we have an example I'm thinking of now of a superintendent in the Permian Basin in South Texas, where one of the richest oil fields in the world, and a lot of jobs there, and they're dying for students to get trained and come onto these opportunities. They've had an open position for a couple years now that they can't get anyone to fill, in part because I think there's, the Senator mentioned this, there's a challenge to be able to connect it with the schedule. You're not going to get someone who's making a decent salary and work in the oil field to come in, take a day off from work and go teach one of these things. So how can you make it more flexible? How can you get that person certified so they can come in and do that? So I think some of these challenges around providing more flexibility related to staffing and related to sort of how you structure the workday and the school day for these kids has to be more flexible, so you can provide for more of these opportunities for these kids, and that requires no money or very little money.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So I promised some time, but we are out of time. So these three wonderful panelists will be around for the remaining of the convention, I believe, or the conference, I believe. So I encourage you to ask your questions. I'm going to summarize just some things that I heard as takeaways, because it was so full. This hour was so full, and we could talk for another hour, I'm sure. But some things that I heard loud and clear: all means all. Incentivize the action and adult behavior that you want to see. Guarantee funding for success. That incentivizes things. Green coats to white coats. Why aren't we doing that model? Why are we doing all of these programs for every other sector but not education? Let's bring that into education. It's not the either or most often, but it's most often the both and. You can't simply create one policy and expect that to work. Let's see. Change the dinner conversations. Change the conditions that those dinner conversations are going to occur. Invest in research and development, because risk-taking is not bad. And then codify what works when you find that. And then finally, their last remarks and advice to you: ask students, educators, and families what they need, and then really listen. Give time for long-term solutions to work. Don't settle for less than anyone would expect anywhere else. And then finally, seek to create partnerships. And that includes new staffing models and schedules. We have the tools. Let's use them. Thank you so much. Help me in thanking these panelists.